Hello, my name is Liam Tennant. I am a student here at Northwest Vista College, and I am currently studying English and filmmaking with hopes to somehow obtain a PhD in something along those same lines. Do you recognize this? How about this? You may or may not recognize this, but you definitely recognize this. I bet you do. And I say that in full confidence because there's only a small, sequestered number of people who don't recognize the famous monster from the 1931 smash hit film, Frankenstein. From the box office success that led to the invention of the film franchise, the humanitarian subtext and themes, and its 90-year-old legacy over film, literature, the arts, and even all of pop culture, Frankenstein became the most influential horror film of the early 20th century. After the success of their other 1931 Gothic horror film, Dracula, Universal Studios decided to launch another addition to their collection. Frankenstein made over $1 million at the box office, inspiring the studio to make a sequel, Bride of Frankenstein, out of the omitted pieces that were left out of the original Frankenstein novel and screenplay. Now, this wasn't the first sequel to be projected onto a screen, but it was the first horror sequel and the first sequel to be a mainstream success. Dracula, Wolfman, and the Invisible Man would follow this trail that was so well blazed. Both of the first two Frankenstein films went on to become registered in the Library of Congress under the United States National Film Registry for being of extreme historical and aesthetic significance. Frankenstein made its debut in the middle of the Great Depression and many years after the end of World War I. Frankenstein director and World War I veteran James Whale was subject to the terrible sights of the trenches, something he brought with him to the set of Frankenstein. Whether he knew it or not, the subtle textures and dread of the war would make their way into his film. According to Professors Friedman and Kale, who wrote Monstrous Progeny, critics argue that Frankenstein's creation, dressed in workman's clothing, represents the disfigured veterans and homeless tramps wandering around the countryside during the post-war era. While war films didn't show the brutality and butchery of the battlefields, horror films did their best to get as close as they could, attracting those who wished to find a fictional terror that would distance themselves from the authentic ones outside the theater doors. There's a whole lot of subtext and thematic content in Frankenstein about ecological horror, LGBTQIA horror, and religion versus science, but I don't have enough time to go into a full analysis on that, so just check out these books for more information on that subject. Frankenstein invented much more than just film franchises and blockbuster sequels. Frankenstein invented and reinforced a bunch of tropes and ideas. The mad scientist, the Gothic castle settings, the abstract, almost expressionistic laboratory, grave robbing, the hunchback assistant, the use of lightning as a great power of either the natural or supernatural, the angry mob with pitchforks and torches, the defiance of God / the aesthetic seeds of what would become religious horror. In the name of God, now I know what it feels like to be God. The popularization of Gothic horror, the inclusivity of science as a proponent of horror, the ending that ends in flames, etc. I won't lie, it's a pretty grisly tale, but it changed everything. The claim, Frankenstein is the most influential horror film of the early 20th century, is a controversial one. Many people might even say that title belongs to Dracula instead. After all, if it weren't for Dracula's success, then Frankenstein would have never even been greenlit. Dracula also did go on to inspire many ripoffs of vampire films in its times, and it spawned a much larger franchise than Frankenstein did. The only issue is that Frankenstein may have only happened because Dracula's success inspired them to make more horror films, but the films that ripped off the vampire classic, Nosferatu, Vampire, and Genuine, A Tale of a Vampire, were all made before Dracula's film adaptation and had very similar ideas. Vampires are of legend and mythology that date back hundreds of years, and while vampire films as a whole subgenre have made more money and spawned more popularity than Frankenstein's films, Frankenstein is a completely original piece of fiction created by Mary Shelley from her own imagination. Dracula, on the other hand, was inspired by Irish legends and Turkish history. Frankenstein was not a visual or highly descriptive novel. The majority of the book does not describe the laboratory or the monster in any detail, so the visual brilliance that came to the screen was completely created wholly by Universal Studios and its creative team, including James Whale. Dracula sunk its fangs into the vampire market, but Frankenstein's creative artistic sense and cleverly adapted visuals took hold of the whole entirety of motion picture history. It influenced films like Ex Machina, Tetsuo the Iron Man, the works of Cronenberg, the works of Burton, Eraserhead, Donnie Darko, and Anatomia Extinction. And there you have it. If you didn't already know, now you know the significance of the modern Prometheus.